the chairman of the Senate Budget Committee, Romina Boccia from the Heritage Foundation, and our own Steve Leisman and Rick Santelli, all here to talk about this tax speech. Senator Gregg, starting with you, what were your observations about the way the president framed his priorities on this, and where does it leave the process, as really it was initially thought to be kind of a Congress-driven process from here on out?
Well, I thought he framed it perfectly in that he basically talked about the need to give middle-income Americans relief, and he talked about the way a better tax law would create much more prosperity for our nation, and the fact that there's so much money basically stuck overseas that should be back here being invested in the United States, which would create jobs. It was all about jobs and prosperity, which is what tax reform, which is how tax reform should be defined and pushed forward if you're the President of the United States or if you're a member of Congress. So I thought actually it was an excellent speech on the themes of how to proceed with tax reform. Obviously the specifics were limited, but they should be limited at this time until there's an agreement or until they're much closer to an agreement. But I thought it was a pretty good kickoff to the effort.
Romina, did it push all the right buttons for you?
Absolutely. I think the president was right on point. He emphasized correctly that a business tax reform really is about creating jobs and higher wages for American workers. And that is so important to understand because that is the key component to growing this economy. We just heard in Q2 we reached 3% growth. This is what America needs more of, and tax reform is one of the biggest policy priorities to get us there.
Steve, not so much on details. Obviously, this was a statement of kind of top-down priorities, but also, therefore, not a whole lot about the inherent trade-offs in getting something like this through. I mean, you're throwing out, again, that 15% target for corporate taxes, which, you know, other folks in the process in Congress are saying probably is a long shot.
Yeah, I mean, get Harwood over in this chair. I shouldn't be here. This is a political speech, really, and I was looking for things to talk about, and that's really where we are. I'm sort of surprised my colleague from the Heritage Foundation said it pushed all the right buttons. The buttons to push at this point are ones that tell us what are the rates, what are the trade-offs, what deductions are going away, will it be revenue neutral? These are the things that the economics world and the policy world are waiting for. I do want to underscore something that Elon said earlier. When he said ideally it would be a tax rate of 15% for companies, that kind of presented a little bit more wiggle room than I've heard from the president in the past. He kept saying it's going to be 15%, and nobody in Washington is saying that they can actually achieve 15% because it would boost the deficit too much. So the idea that the president has some political reality in this score about it being 15%, I think, is a good sign, actually, for the potential passage. Everything the president said is generally agreed, I think, on both sides of the aisle, depending upon, you know, how far right or left you get. The idea that the tax code's counterproductive, the idea that deductions just and the code itself distort economic behavior, those are all generally agreed. What's not generally agreed are the details to get there.
Yeah, and Rick, do you think that's going to derail this process? You know, again, we get the 3% GDP number this morning. ADP number was hot, hot, hot. The 10-year is still, I don't know, is some woeful level. And now we're talking about tax cuts or tax reform. I mean, do you think something big is on the way here or no?
Well, let's take a couple of little pieces. First of all, the president's correct about 3% today, but he's incorrect that President Obama never had 3%. He never had 3% for a whole year, that's true. But President Obama had many quarters that were in the 4s, one that was in the 5s.
Rick, I want to correct you.
It's not about one quarter.
Rick, I want to correct you because the president was right on that. He did say 3% yearly for the previous administration. So I want to stand up for the president's accuracy on that score.
Good. Okay. But what most people walked away with is that we have a 3% economy. We do if this quarter is replicated for the next 3. Now, moving on, if I recall in September of '86, I was in one of these pits. The vote was 74 to 25. Okay, the Senate passing real reform. My issue with this president isn't what he said today. I kind of like it. And you need to build a bridge between the middle class and corporate taxes because that's the thing they may be able to do. See, we have this little thing called the Byrd Rule. We have Democrats that are not going to work with this president. And in my opinion, if you do it through reconciliation, you have to make adjustments that is going to make it garbage, in my opinion. If you really want to do reform, somehow you need to reach the other side of the aisle. I think they're unreachable. So what does that mean in practical terms moving through the political speech? It means that middle-class taxes, really complicated. Maybe you bring the left on board. But boy, that's a complicated move. Corporate taxes are much easier to tweak. Well, I'm not sure if his base is going to like that. So I don't know. That's my read on it.
Quickly.
Can I jump in
Mr.
here
Gregg.
for a second? I was in the room in 1986. I was on the Ways and Means Committee, and Rick's right. It was a bipartisan effort, and I wrote the last major bipartisan bill with Ron Wyden on major tax reform and the Simpson-Bowles bill. But I'm a great fan of Rick. I listen to him all the time and admire his thoughts. But I don't think he's right on the issue of using reconciliation. Reconciliation can be used. It does make the tax law temporary, but it doesn't get subject to the Byrd rule in this instance, because the Byrd rule requires that policy not exceed a budget effect, whereas in tax policy, everything is budget effect. So you can write a very substantive, very large tax bill under reconciliation. Now, it would be better to do it in a bipartisan way.
Doesn't that mean you have a lot of pay-fors, Judge? Doesn't that mean you have a lot of pay-for language in there? I'm not arguing with your expertise in this area, but doesn't it make it so there has to be a couple of more sacrificial lambs to do it with 50 votes?
I think it comes down to... Are they willing to cut spending? Because they don't have to have deficit. They don't have to have revenue-neutral tax reform. All they have to do is deficit-neutral tax reform. They could just adopt a cap on mandatory spending on the entitlements, set up a commission to debate the details of that plan, get it through. Yeah, a cap on mandatory spending will go.
That's simply not going to. Let me tell you something. That's simply not going to happen. You're not going to cap entitlements
before we're capping. Yeah, exactly. But guys, I think at least we're getting the contours of all of the argument laid out. We have to go. But look, go ahead, real quickly.
You can get. You don't have to. You can put a 10-year package together, and you can use dynamic scoring, and in the end, you can probably get very close to very big tax cut numbers as a result of doing that. You can certainly get the personal rates down to 25%, corporate rates down to the mid-22%.
All right. Former Senator Judd Gregg, Romina Boccia, Steve Leisman, and Rick Santelli. Guys, thank you all. Very much appreciated.